And now to introduce our 2 o'clock Interfaith Lecture Series here in the Hall of Philosophy, where this week we're focusing on the theme Religion, Vanishing, and Emerging. Today's distinguished guest is Dr. Samuel Chan. Who would have thought, he writes, when in 1973 the student Samuel Chan was serving Beulah Heights Bible College as a janitor, a cook, and a dishwasher, that he would return in 1989 as president of the same college. On his bad days, he probably felt he was doing all those same jobs still. Under his leadership, it has become the country's first predominantly African-American Bible college. Dr. Chan is a former pastor, college president, and chancellor, and now serves as president emeritus of Beulah Heights University. His educational background includes 2 honorary degrees. In this season of his life, Dr. Chan does one thing: leadership. His singular vision for his life is to help others succeed. As a dream releaser, he serves pastors, ministries, and businesses as a leadership architect and change strategist. Dr. Chan speaks regularly at leadership conferences, churches, corporations, ministerial conferences, seminars, and other leadership development opportunities. Dr. Chan serves on the board of advisors of EQUIP, Dr. John Maxwell's ministry, equipping 5 million leaders worldwide. Dr. Chan has authored and published 13 books, including the book Futuring, Leading Your Church into Tomorrow, which leaders are using as handbooks worldwide in leadership development. Having been raised in a pastor's home in India, he has uniquely equipped Dr. Chan to share his passion, which is mentoring, developing, and inspiring leaders to break all limits in ministry and in the marketplace. You'll be pleased to know that Sam Chan will do a book signing on the porch of the Hall of Missions immediately after this lecture, and his books will be sold in front of the Hall of Missions as well. The title of the conversation today is Emerging Church. I'm happy to note that Sam's wife is here, Brenda, and we're delighted to welcome them both to Chautauqua. We're most grateful to the Eileen and Warren Martin Lectureship Fund for Emerging Studies in Bible and Theology for support of this week's Interfaith Lecture Series. Again, we thank Warren and his granddaughter, Hannah, for being here with us today. And now please join me in an appreciative Chautauqua welcome for Dr. Samuel Chan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, the moral of the story is very simple. Be good to your janitors. You never know when they're going to come back and have some ideas of their own. I went to the first 2 lectures today, and I found them to be intriguing. And because I went to the lectures today, I should never have gone, because I'm so nervous right now. The bar is so high, it'll be easy for me to crawl under it. So I just want to set expectations over here very, very clearly. So if you say, he's not as good as Dr. Cerf, I would say, yes, you're right. I want to thank Robert and Maureen and the entire crew for making this possible for me to come over here. I've known Bob since the mid-90s, and we were starting some urban work in Atlanta, and at that time, he was doing great work at Emory, and I remember calling him and asking him if he would give me a little bit of his time, and what a wise man, and how he helped and guided men. So we've kept in touch over all these maybe over 2.5 decades. So I want to just thank you for, you all know what an amazing leader he already is. Thank God for him. And now, I came in, I live in Atlanta, so we flew in just in time for yesterday's 2 o'clock to be ending, and was able to catch a little bit at the end of it. And then I noticed in the brochure, the who's who have been here. And you're looking at the who's he. I'll try to live up to that. I came to the United States of America in 1973 from India. I was 20 then. I'll be 63 in October. Save you the math, because some of you are going 83, 93, 2003. I'm one of you. And as Bob said, the college gave me a job as a breakfast cook, dishwasher, and janitor. I had really never cooked. And remember now, this is Atlanta. This is early 70s. Breakfast cook. Do you all eat grits? Anybody here eats grits? Yeah. So there, I had the supervisor from Rockingham, North Carolina. Her name was Annie Mae Hill at that time. And she taught me how to cook grits the old-fashioned way. There was no microwaves in those days, over a slow flame, and it had to be a wooden spatula that you stir it. She said, always use a wooden spatula. Listen, when you're a foreigner, you don't ask questions. You just do like you're supposed to do, you're like you're told to do. So I'd get up every morning about 4 o'clock and go down to the kitchen and start cooking. The Americans would come to eat breakfast between 7 and 7:30. I'd do dishes till 8:30. They'd go to classes from 8:30 to 12:30. And then I'd become the janitor. And one day I was janiting, cleaning up. Yeah, that's... Listen, I'm not from here, so I can make up words as I go along. That's my excuse. I don't know what your excuse is, but that's my excuse. And so I was in the dean's office picking up the trash, and his secretary, in those days that's what they called them, secretary, was sitting right outside his office. And when I was picking up her trash, I saw her. And I went, mm-hmm. And I became a very regular trash picker-upper. Her trash can was always clean. So after 4 years, she saw some gifts in my life. She said, he can cook. He can wash dishes. He can carry out the trash. So she offered me a full-time employment opportunity. And I have been her employee now for 36 years. That's my wife, Brenda. Brenda, if you'll stand up just for a minute, I want everyone to know who Brenda is. Brenda and I have lived a lot of life, good and not so good, in many different ways. And I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing today. So today I have the opportunity to travel all over the world. I stumbled into this leadership thing. I'm a leadership consultant. People always want to know, so how did this happen? I'm going to tell you the true story, how it happened. I've never had a course in it. I didn't go to university for it. When I was the president of Buell Heights University, my especially large churches, pastors would call me and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Can you help me with the strategic plan? I'm thinking about going off on a staff retreat. How should we talk about this? I'm just talking to them. And then there was this pastor of a very large church, maybe 6,000, 7,000 people from another state, called me and said, can I come out and have lunch with you? So he flew down to Atlanta. We had a long lunch. At the end of lunch, he talked, I talked, we just talked. At the end of lunch, he said to me, what do I owe you for this? I said, There's money in this. So I made up a number. He wrote me a check. Can someone tell me what's my greatest regret? Yeah, I didn't ask enough. And that's how I became a consultant. I'm the biggest accident you've ever seen. But I don't know how it is, but in God's providence and grace, now I get to travel all over the world in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Just got back from Brazil last week. This week alone, I'm here. Right now, tomorrow, I'll be in Columbus. The day after that, in Norfolk, Virginia. Weekend in Seattle. And I'll end up Sunday evening in Fresno, California. So I get to see the inside workings of a church. Let me give you a few disclaimers as to what I will not be talking about. I'm going to describe as to what I see. I'm not a sociologist. I don't have a degree in what I do. I'm a surgeon who doesn't even have a license. So you just need to know that I know who I am and who I'm not. And in the midst of all of that, I get to be at some of the largest churches in the world, and I get to see the inside workings. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to describe what is happening. I'm not an apologist for them. I'm not going to argue their case. I'm just going to say, here's a white truck. You say, I don't like the white truck. I'll say, I'm sorry. All I know is it's a white truck. And what I'm going to describe to you are neither theological or doctrinal. It is where the church is emerging, where the church is going. So to give you a background of where I'm going to go into with this emerging church is to take you into the front part of my book called Futuring, which will be available after this is over, in which I help us understand the two kinds of thinking that are going on inside the church. And to put it on paper so people could get a handle around it, I call that natives and immigrants. So every church has two tribes in it. Natives, those who've been there, and immigrants who are coming in, or those who have been there with new types of thinking. So let me give you a few of the differences between natives and immigrants. Natives are slow deciders. They have committees about committees. And things get tabled and then picked back up. And there's Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedure. And immigrants are clueless. Who is Robert? And they're quick deciders. It's like, okay, sounds great. Let's go do this. Natives are threatened by change. Immigrants lead change. They're not going to wait for, don't fix it if it's not broken. Let's break it. And then fix it. Natives are yes, but. You know people like that? Yes, but. Immigrants are yes, and. They have very clear ways of living in both the worlds. Natives are linear. 3 comes after 2, and 2 comes after 1. Immigrants are looped. They can start talking about point number 5, end up with number 1. Natives fight against chaos and instability. Consistency is the hallmark. But for immigrants, creating chaos and thriving in instability. Surfing is their sport. Unpredictability gets the juices going. What if scenarios just enthrall them? Let me a couple more. Natives learn formally, but immigrants learn informally by doing. And the last one, this is becoming so important. Natives are auditory, but immigrants are visual. So with that in mind, I want to give you 11 things. I could give you 111, but they told me they don't pay overtime here. So I'm going to give you 11 things to think about. The first thing that will stand out to you about the emerging church is the changing delivery systems. Changing delivery systems, how something is delivered. My wife and I walked into the antique store, and we saw a typewriter there. Reminded me, I've had the typewriter. How many of you will at least fess up that at one time you have seen a typewriter? Well, your laptops and your iPads and your phones are still a typewriter. Nothing has changed about ASDFG, colon. Nothing's changed about. So the system remains the same. The telephone. I know we are not dialing. How many of you remember the party line? Anybody old enough to remember party line? I remember when Brenda and I were living in Michigan, there were 12 people on the same line. This is before reality TV. All you had to do was be good at picking it up. Okay. Before we go any further, I want to see how many of you are honest. How many of you picked it up just for the heck of it? I'm going to ask that question again. I sense a bunch of liars in this place here. How many of you done it? See more hands go up, even on the front row. The message remains the same, but the delivery systems have changed. Let me talk about some subtopics under that. Multi-site. Multi-site simply means you have a mothership, and then there's got lots of dinghies around it. So this weekend I'll be speaking in Seattle. I'll do a Saturday night service and 4 Sunday morning services, which will be beamed to, I'll be in 2 locations going back and forth, which will be beamed to 5 other locations, one of them being as far as West Palm Beach. So multi-site. In 1990, there were only 10 churches in America that had multi-site. Today, over 6,000 churches in America have multi-site churches. That means one church. At one time, Chautauqua had multi-site 400 and some locations. Is the same principle. But that is the growing phenomena because it gives a bigger footprint. Social media. Whenever I'm speaking at a church, I know the smallest audience I'm speaking to is in front of me. 2.5 weeks ago, I was in New Orleans, had 30,000 people at the Smoothie King auditorium. I spoke to them. And as I'm talking to the 30,000 in front of me, I know there are millions who are watching me. So who do you pay attention to? The camera or the people sitting right in front of you? And the division, it's the delivery system. So for a communicator, it becomes an arduous task of realizing there are millions who are watching you out there, but you have to connect with the people in the room. Is that making sense to you? Is the challenge of whatever you say is being tweeted out in real time. And you may not even have said it, but it will be referenced to you. In case someone's on Twitter here, I'm at Sam Chand. The whole idea is we're living in an age where every social piece is being leveraged, be it Facebook, Instagram, Periscope, email. Everything gets more and more leveraged. Today, I launched a new product called Tuesdays with Sam Chand. If you want to find out more about it, you go to samchand.com. It's free. Every Tuesday, people who are on my database will receive 2 free videos, 3 minutes. From me, on some leadership topic, 3 minutes from a guest leader. So it will basically be Chautauqua Light. And free. You can appreciate that. So how is the church mobilizing itself to harness the power of social media? I go to churches where when you're speaking, if people have questions, I understand at the end of this, some of you will have answers and I'll have the questions. It's all right, this afternoon, it's after lunch, I understand. The blood is where the action is right now. But many churches I go to, questions are being texted in real time. And it also offers anonymity. When you go and receive the offering, ministry is, salvation might be free, but ministry is expensive. And when now you can give it by text, you can get it online, you can have recurrent payments, you can do it in person. There's so many different ways of doing the same thing. And what about the online church? And the 24/7 internet church, that you can tune in at any time and listen to anybody, and you can get it all on your iPad or your phone, streamed live from wherever you might be. Guests can text their presence. Many churches you go to, you may get a welcome card, something that you fill out about your presence. Now you can just text that information. So the social media is definitely taken over, especially with the younger generation. I've got 2 daughters, Rachel and Debbie. Rachel's 35, Debbie's 33. They'll send me a text. I'll respond back to them. They'll send me another text, respond back to them. We'll go back and forth. After a while, I get tired of it and I call them, but they don't answer. Does anyone feel my pain today? Don't you feel like reaching through that phone and saying, I brought you in. You've said it, haven't you? And so you text them, where are you? I'm right here. Well, answer your fill in the blank phone. So how do you communicate? That's the wavelength that they are on. This is the wavelength I'm on. So if I am going to take responsibility for communication from a podium such as this in a church, I've got to utilize all the mediums that are available to me. Mega church. Let's talk about mega church. What number am I on? Okay, I'm on number 4 now. I talked about message, multi-site, social media. I know some of you, if I miss a number, you're going to say, what was that number? What was that number? So just to bring you healing instantaneously, I'm number 4 now. I know some of you, I can see the OCD people right from here. Now, did you put a comma after that sentence or small groups? So as churches get larger, how many of you know the accordion? Accordion, I used to play, I still got 2 of them at home. I was raised up playing the accordion. And you know how it gets larger and smaller, larger and smaller? That's how churches have to do now. Because you are so large, you also have to create community, and small groups are the breathing mechanisms that build community in the life of the church. Number 5, mega churches. Almost 1,500 churches in the United States have an attendance of over 2,000. Now, 2,000 is now really no more a mega church, more of a medium-sized church. Bob is from Atlanta, so he knows that dozens of churches that see over 5,000 people every Sunday. This church, I'll be in St. Louis this weekend. Between all their services, they'll see between 12 and 15,000 people in the seats. And so it goes. So the mega church is, I call that the Walmart of church. You can be grocery shopping on one end and get your oil changed on the other end. It's a one-stop shop. And because you're a mega church, you have more resources. You have more physical resources, more financial resources, more facilities resources, more human resources. You have a bigger footprint. You can draw from a larger audience. And so the mega church is here to stay. But the mega church has also become the multi-site church. I have a friend in Edmond, Oklahoma, outside Oklahoma City, a small town. He's a mega church, but because of multi-site and real-time any weekend, he sees 75,000 people in their seats. We're not just talking about people in virtual reality. 75,000 people. Simply because the mega church that has an online presence. Over dinner, I was telling Bob yesterday about the Redeemed Christian Church of God out of Nigeria. I was in Nigeria about 4 weeks ago. I've got to tell you about this church. Redeemed Christian Church of God, one of the largest movements in the world. They have a sanctuary outside Dallas that will seat 60,000 people. Once a month, they have a service in Lagos. 1.2 million people come to that one service. The arena that they sit in is 2 miles long, 1.5 miles wide. Jumbotrons. So when you speak there, and if you say something funny, it takes forever. Because Jumbotrons, you know, ha, 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 ha. Everything has 10 echoes to it. It's hard to imagine that, but that is what's happening all around us. Number 6, multi-generational. Most churches are serving 5 generations at the same time. Let me talk to you about the implications of that. Style of worship. How do you do music that keeps your grandchildren engaged and keeps the great-grand parents engaged at the same time. Preaching styles. Preaching styles have changed. I was thinking about this the other day. I'm on my 5th preaching style. Because you have to create a preaching style that is relevant to the people you're speaking to. I'll give you one of my challenges. So I was born and raised in a pastor's home, went to Sunday school, learned the story about Moses and Joshua and Jacob and Daniel and David and so on and so forth. So there was a time that you could stand in a Christian church pulpit and you say, and you know the story about Daniel in the... Now, if I say, and you know the story of Daniel in the... It's a blank silence. So now I have to take time from my preaching time to tell the story. There was a man named Daniel. He was a Jewish captive in Babylonian. And I have to go through the whole story to make the point. Because the literacy is increasing, ignorance is increasing as well. Preaching styles. Vocabulary has changed. Why? The word why, W-H-Y. My dad was as old school as they come. So I never dared, it was an unspoken law at our house, never said why, or I wouldn't be here today. You know, my dad didn't spank us. I mean, he really did the other stuff. So, but those were the days, and I'm back in India. Why it was asked in a different way than why is asked now. Now when someone says why, really want to know an answer. And instead of giving an attitude, you got to give an answer. But vocabulary, the word why. So when you have different generations working together, and the boss is old like me, and somebody else is younger, and there's a why, we hear it differently. And so the vocabulary continues to change. How about, I'm talking about the generations, how about the decibel of music? I know churches where they hand out little airplane earplugs. I know of churches that are having a mass exodus because somebody will not turn down something somewhere. But if you turn it too far down, your grandkids want it how? Louder. Another thing I'm seeing is churches are reversing the order of what comes first. It used to be form and then function. You got yourself organized and then you started doing. Form and then function. Now it is totally the opposite. It is function and then the form. We'll start doing it and then figure out how it's going to go. We'll make mistakes as quickly as we can. Let's get them out of the way. And we're going to keep making new mistakes. So form before function. The graying of America. If AARP, I resisted them for 10 years, finally gave in. Now spoken for them 2 times at the general convention. That's another thing. You go to it and there are, Lord knows how many thousands of people. If AARP was a nation, there'd be about between number 24 and 25 in the world in population. Did you know 2/3 of the people who have ever turned 65 are alive today? So this is not just the graying of America, this is called the encore generation. This is also known as the sandwich generation. Because for the first time in our human history, you're taking care of your parents and your children. In some cases, your grandchildren. More families are raising grandchildren now than ever in our history. So the sandwich generation. Should I go to my daughter's recital or should I take mama to the doctor? And that is creating challenges of its own. One of the very encouraging things that I find about the emerging church is the willingness to unlearn. Alvin Toffler said this. He said, the illiterate of the future will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. I'm very encouraged by the fact of the emerging church that's willing to unlearn and relearn. Number 7, lesser and lesser, fewer and fewer people have what we call a home church. You walk up to somebody and say, do you have a home church? Their answer would be, well, I go to church. Because many, many, many people, a growing tribe of people, are attending multiple churches. They go to maybe an 8:30 service where they really like the preaching, and they go to an 11 o'clock service where the children can be handled like the children like it there, they like it there. Or they want the music from there and the preaching from there. So you say, are they shoppers of the faith? Absolutely. Walking up and down aisles of church with a grocery cart. Look, it is a smorgasbord, definitely, definitely. And when people are relocating, they're not looking for the same denomination, they're not looking for the same church. They're looking for something convenient and close. Somewhere they can park easily, something that has the product that they have for the children. So it used to be that if a United Methodist left New York and moved to Atlanta, they would start looking for a United Methodist church. That is not the case. Now it is what is close, what's convenient, who's got a good program for our children. Where do we fit best? So denominationalism has definitely, on the other side, emerged. Let me give you number 8. This is the fastest growing tribe in the church right now. It is what I call non-member regular attendee. Non-member regular attendee. Let me say it again. Non-member regular attendee. So many of you are nodding your heads and smiling. You're probably one of those. You're one. Okay, you're a oh no, you're not. Okay. I'm not one of them. Non-member regular attendees are people who have been coming to your church. We call them chronic visitors or regular visitors. Or regular visitors, These are people who have been coming to church for many, many years, but will never join your church. We call them non-member regular attendee. Now, non-member regular attendee is, let me describe this person to you. If you know of somebody like that in your church who's been coming for a while but has not joined your church, I would like for you to get their picture in your head, and I'm going to describe them to you. Most of them are professionals, white collar, family, they got jobs, they are low maintenance, they are more regular in attendance than members, they give more than members, and cause 0 problems. They come, they worship, they give, and they go. When they walk in, we shake them in. During the sermon, we shake them up. During the offering, we shake them down. After the service, we shake them out. Whole lot of shaking going on. Non-member regular attendee. So churches that depend on members, I'm talking about emerging church now. Churches depend on members. You have to be a member to plunge a toilet, to sweep the sidewalk, to be a greeter, usher, sing in the choir, whatever it might be. If you have to be a member, that pool is shrinking. And it'll continue to shrink. And your human resource pool is going to continue to shrink because non-member regular attendees are going to keep coming. So the question the churches are going to ask, I'm going to say this twice because this is, no one else is talking about this. I'm just seeing this. So I have not done any study on this. But I see it everywhere I go because I'm in over 200 churches a year. So I get to see the inside workings of all of this firsthand. Here's the question. What is it, let me call the church ABC Church. What is it that you cannot do unless you're a member at ABC Church? Let me say that again. What is it that you cannot do unless you're a member of ABC Church? And what that does is now you're having to decide what are the essentials for which you have to be a member. And the churches are having a difficult time giving a membership proposition. The value of, because to the immigrants, I'm here. I serve. I make no problems. I give. I leave you alone. What else do you want? I'm a great customer. Non-member, regular attendee. 3 more. The way churches are being governed are much different from just a few years ago. Instead of one leader, it's a flatter organization of executive leadership team. More team-driven than one person. Now, we all understand that at the end of the day, there is a person held responsible for anything that goes somewhere. But governance is not relegated to one hierarchical person. It is being shared among executive leadership. Number 10. Because of global exposure, through the internet, especially as Surf was talking about earlier, the bar of preaching has been raised. So when people come to their local church now, they've already watched this mega thing happen. They have seen a choir that is larger than their entire Sunday attendance. They have seen a preacher who seemed to know Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic and other languages that no one else has heard of. They have seen a singer sing. They have had amazing teaching. And then they go to their church. And then they tell their pastor they're coming in, hey, I watched so-and-so on TV this morning. He was amazing. So the whole idea of exposure, the emerging church is not a monolithic group anymore. Now you can see what's going on in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Nigeria, Brazil, Canada, and even the United States. Exposure. Finally, number 11. Commitment. One of the greatest, I think, fallacies out there is that people are not as committed anymore. I want to say to you, people are as committed only for shorter periods of time. Now, the church I grew up in, once you volunteered to do something, it was a death sentence. All right, let me say another way. It was a life sentence, if that makes you feel any better. I mean, the only way to get out of it was to die or leave the church. And he didn't want to do either one of them in a hurry. So if you volunteered one Sunday to keep the nursery, guess what? You're raising 10 generations. They just keep coming. You volunteer to teach a class or whatever it might be, you just got stuck. Well, immigrants are not going to get stuck. They will say, okay, that sounds very intriguing. I'm happy to do that. How long do you want me to do that? We never asked that question. We just closed our eyes and jumped in. They're smarter than us. They want an exit plan. They want a golden parachute. And so people are as committed. And the commitment is not just about duration, it is about the commitment itself. There has to be a cause. Why am I doing what I'm doing? There has to be a compelling why, W-H-Y, behind the what. A compelling cause. I'm not just going to do this. Tell me what will be accomplished through this cause. So I have, in conclusion, want to give you 4 words. Actually, 4 words or 4 alphabets that will help us to kind of synopsize everything that I've said today. And it is the word epic. E-P as in Paul, I-C. Epic. Epic. The emerging church is epic. E. E stands for experiential. Give me an experience. I just don't want to come to sit. I need to experience something. In Atlanta right now, they are building 2 new stadiums at the same time. The Braves, hope they have better seasons. And the Falcons, and I hope the same for them. I remember listening to Mr. Arthur Blank, one of the founders of Home Depot and owner of the Falcons, Atlanta Falcons. And they are building a new dome to seat 65,000 people. So here was the dome, and here was the parking lot. They're just flipping it over. The parking lot will become the dome, and the dome will become the parking lot. And somebody asked him, hey, listen, this is not an old building. This is a fairly new building. Everything is good. Seats are good. Water works. Toilets flush. Lights work. Why are you building a $1.3 billion edifice? His answer intrigued me greatly. Here's his answer, and it applies to church. People don't come to the dome to watch football. They come to the dome to have an experience. So now there are fine dining restaurants, bowling arcades, basketball courts, movie theaters, the ubiquitous hot dog stands. And oh, by the way, there's a football game going on as well. EPIC. E stands for experiential. P stands for participatory. How do I participate? Give me a cause to engage with. Help me participate in something that is meaningful. Don't just ask me to come and sit. I want to be a part of it. Missions has changed. Missions has changed. It was the time, I'm talking about global missions. In India, I'm a child of missionaries who came and preached the gospel to us. At one time, it was somebody in another country who was well-resourced, could write a check, send a missionary who would go and do the work. Those days have pretty much changed. It is, I'm going to give you the check, but I want to come with the check. I want to participate in what is going on. So E is experiential, P is participation, I is icon-driven, icon-driven. Give me pictures, make it plain. I want to see the results. Everything that we do is icon-driven. Your kiosks, your phones, your tablets, your computer screens, everything is icon-driven. As I was walking the red brick wall walk, there's icons, no bicycles, no cars. There's icons everywhere. And so the new church, the emerging church is iconoclastic. And C is connections. Give me relationships-based opportunities. I just don't want opportunities. I don't just want relationships. I want relationships that lead to opportunities. So when we look at the word, a lot is being written about the group called millennials, and millennials this and the millennials that. I want to submit to you that is really putting people in a very narrow place. Because that is chronological age. Oh, you were born and such, so you must be such. That's really not true. I think all of that has to do with a mindset, a psyche, a way of thinking. So age has nothing to do with being a native or an immigrant, emerging church or not. It is a function of how we think as human beings. In my book, Futuring, the first chapter is named, This Ain't Your Daddy's Church. I thought I'd start by offending everybody in the first chapter. Because what we are doing is we're looking for how it used to be. And we're all longing for what used to be at one time. However, things are so very different. If I was to speak in Australia, I speak there about 3 times a year, New Zealand 2-3 times a year. If I was to speak in Australia or New Zealand, I'm way overdressed. All I need is skinny jeans and a shirt hanging out to the largest of audiences. Then I go to some churches where unless I'm in a suit and a tie, how can you dare come inside our church? Is one right, the other wrong? No. It is both and. It's not either or. And the emerging church is doing a great job of embracing both and. It's been an honor and joy to serve you. It's exactly 45 minutes from the time you gave it to me, and so thank you.
We thank you a great deal. Professor Dr. Chan, you've challenged us and stimulated us. I know there will be many questions and comments as we engage your mind and vast experience. Some of our audience will have to depart for various reasons, and we ask you to do so quietly. But I invite those who wish to engage our speaker now with a question or comment, please line up at the microphones on the floor. And Dr. Chan, you will acknowledge them in alternating order, and we will conclude promptly by 3:15. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, well, thanks for a great description of the emerging church. I'm curious from your view of the white van of the emerging church, or the white truck, what do you see in terms of this continuing undercurrent of spiritual formation and contemplative, which seems to be creeping into all denominations?
Just the vocabulary spiritual formation is so new, huh? It's so new. And yet it is so ancient at the same time.
Yes.
In fact, we were having a conversation about that this morning with Bob and Barbara and others around the table, and Larry, wherever you are, Larry. And we were talking about this whole issue of spiritual formation. Parents start forming that inside of us. Whatever their values are, they're somewhere either totally outspoken or through their actions start doing some spiritual formation. And then friends take over. And then we come of a certain age when nobody takes over. Because I remember my dad saying, don't play with Larry. He's not good for you. And then I played with Larry. And then Larry left and played with somebody else. And I'm left by myself. So spiritual formation has become a real center focus for leadership development. Because we know this, that unless a certain person has the core of the spirituality, a personal core. I'm not talking about something that you get out there. Personal core values, personal convictions. Let me put it in crude form, if you'll allow me to. Because I'm not all that, so I know I can crawl on the wire here. You can't get a good steak from a bad cow. A good steak starts with a good cow. And if a person's spiritual formation is not strong, you'll get ethereal knowledge, you may get good philosophical paradigms, but what people are looking for, I've always looked, not looking for now, have always looked for, is somebody who's authentic, genuine, their walk matches their talk, and that they can be trusted, they have character. I believe that spiritual formation is going to continue to grow, and I'm so glad to see that as emerging. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. So as you were describing the emerging church, it sounded very much to me like my understanding of just evangelicalism in general. And so I was wondering if you could address emerging movements in mainline traditions, and if you could respond to the question, is sort of the future of the church a movement towards evangelicalism, or is there another option?
Very, very good question. So the evangelical church, by and large, are what I would, very, very wide brush I'm going to paint with, can freelance, can be free agents. When you're in the mainline church, you have structures and layers and denominational and oversight. And so a church here, which might be a mainline church, may want to make the kind of emerging transitions that are needed. However, the hierarchy is not always the most cooperative with that. I'm trying to be as nice as I can. And therefore, it's really not about mainline versus evangelical. It is the environment that allows the emerging church to emerge. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have, okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. You talked primarily about the worship experience in the emerging church. And my understanding of church is worship is what prepares us to be the church in the world. Could you address a little bit about what the emerging church is doing to be the church in the world?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. The emerging church is more focused outside its walls today than I've ever seen it before. Now remember, I'm a child of the church. So I've been in church for 2 months shy of 63. But I'm seeing more outward focus to the least, last, and lost as an outgrowth. So I was in a church not long ago, and when you enter, it said, enter to worship, and you're leaving, the same sign flipped around saying, depart to serve. So worship is not relegated to inside the four walls, so to speak. It definitely has greater implications today than ever before, ever before. I see it. I'll be back to you.
There have been some statistics that have shown that a lot of these, some at least, emerging churches get very big very fast, and then there's a drop-off as people leave. They're kind of, the novelty's worn off. For whatever reasons, they end up leaving, so the staying power isn't quite there. So what has been your experience with the emerging churches as you view them over time in terms of their membership retention? The people that were there, are they still there 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later? Have they been able to keep their members?
That's a great question. I have actually tried to study anecdotally what might be the common denominators of churches that have sustainability, if I could call it that, versus those that are shooting stars, flash in the pan, whatever you want to call. The common denominator is that the senior leader, she or he, surrounds herself or himself with not people just like them, but they have a variety of voices, perspectives, that gives them depth. A lot of these churches can grow very fast, but if you don't have depth, the first storm comes, third storm comes, and you're blown away. So if the senior leader is secure enough to have voices that are strong, there are voices that can bring depth, voices that can bring wider perspective, it definitely increases their sustainability. And that's the one common denominator that I have seen in churches that have abided time versus those that came. But I know you're talking about a number of churches that happened, and that's, I can look back and see how everybody was in the same, it was all friends. But they didn't have diversity at the top that they could not put their...
And they had one star leader that, for whatever reasons, flamed out or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have two different questions, if I may.
Are they allowed 2 questions, or does she have to pay more for one? Today only, okay. It's a blue light special only for today.
The first one is the simple one. We live in an era of mergers. So what's the role for the 150-member church in a small town that is not growing? So how do they fit into your picture?
I pastored one of those churches myself, the largest our church ever got. Brendan, our pastors together in Hartford, Michigan, the largest our church ever got was 150. And I want you to know that smaller churches can do a whole lot more than larger churches.
Percentages say that.
Smaller churches are like that Volkswagen. They're nimble. A need comes up, opportunity arises, people are committed to the community, people know each other, there's relationships already in place. Even if they're not coming to your church, there are intrinsic, broad-based relationships. I think a smaller church has a higher acceleration rate than a larger church might.
Okay. And then the second question cuts across different lines. You talk about leadership development and the structures of leadership, particularly within the large churches. How does that happen? And how does God work to make sure that God's call is heard in the organizational structures of the megaliths that we make?
And therein lies the conundrum. A church can grow so large. I know of churches that have 60, 80, $100 million budgets. Churches with, hundreds on staff, acres and acres of property. So if I was a senior pastor of the church for a moment, I'm a small business owner, so as to speak. No sacrilege meant, but I'm dealing with HR issues. I'm dealing with insurance issues. I'm probably in litigation somewhere all the time. Oh, yes. That's why churches have insurance, so that members can sue, so they can give 10% of it back to the church. Been around church too long, I'm sorry. They got staffing issues. They've got 5 generations issues. They got facilities issues. I mean, it just goes on and on. Now, in that busyness of being the CEO, so every pastor's got to have 2 hats on. 2 hats on. Pastor, the spiritual side of things. CEO, everything else. And if you're not careful, everything else can become so big, and the spiritual side can get so small. So when I'm with large church pastors, I am glad to report to you that most of them are consciously struggling to make sure that they hear from God and that they follow through what God is trying to say to them. They're not oblivious to that. And they're also not oblivious to the weaknesses of how you can catch the tiger by the tail. And you can go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting and never have the opportunity to have the meeting. Thank you very much. I'll come back to you, man.
I just want to finish with a great thank you for an extremely well-organized and inspiring presentation. So,
You're very kind. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
The state in which I live will be Anglo minority in about 2025. The nation will be Anglo minority in about 2045. How do you anticipate that affecting the structure and practice of religion as you see it?
I think it'll be affected greatly, but in different ways. So whenever I get an opportunity to talk to international communities of churches in America, I'm an Indian, so there in Atlanta there are lots of Indian churches, Nigerian churches, Korean churches, Latino churches. The first generation was, let's say, spoke, my language is Hindi. Let me use myself for example. First generation spoke Hindi, they had the services in Hindi. Next generation became bilingual. They had services, so they had hodgepodge. One song was in Hindi, another one in English, and those kind of things. But the third generation is moving towards all English. But this bilingual is not willing to go all English. But they want all English. So guess what they're doing? They're going to the English-speaking churches. So one of the biggest impacts is going to be what I call the migration of the church. One tribe to a totally different tribe. Now, when you talk about ethnicities and how that's going to affect, that is not going to be as dramatic as the first one. Because in the first one, you're going to have a whole generation, the sweep to another side. It's not going to be as dramatic simply because of technology. Technology is a great equalizer. Everybody's walking around with smartphones. Doesn't matter which group you're in, you're tweeting, you're Facebooking, you're doing something like that. So you can cut across a lot of, so the music is pretty much in the same bandwidth, the decibels are in the same bandwidth, life perspective is in the same kind of a way. So there are going to be 2 shifts. But the second one will not be as dramatic as the first one, when a whole generation of one language speaking people will go to another church. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in the education of the next generations. Particularly, we're raising our children. I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old in a very secular world. And the story that you made about about Daniel and the Lion's Den. How is it, what's the role of the church and synagogues and other religious institutions in making sure that our kids have a common vocabulary, a common understanding of sort of the basic stories that underlie, dare I say, the United States of America, the sense that we share something in common and that something in common actually comes from the Bible. And so I'm curious about how you see that. I mean, we assembled here have a passion for religion, but perhaps with a minority in this country, maybe not, but something that I think we all have to face as our kids go to the shopping mall and watch, or hopefully not watch, too much of what's on television and in movie theaters. Any thoughts about how we do that?
Well, thank you, first of all, so much for asking. You know, I have 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren, so very, very engaged with that whole conversation inside my own head and around our family. So when a child is born, it basically has, let's say the child is born in a Christian home. I'm just going to go off that assumption, a religious home. So there are 3 forces that really form the child, inform the child, and educate the child in the religious tradition. So one, of course, the first one is the family. The second one is the place of worship. And the third one would be the educational system. So in America, let's just assume that the child is in public school, and so that pretty much, conversations might be there, but let's take that out of the mix. So it leaves the family and the place of worship. So both of them have responsibilities. You know, in our times, we have more time-saving devices and lesser time than ever before. But I remember my dad, every night he would tell us Bible stories. Very animated. Some of them were scary. You know, he said, and the lion went, I wake up in the middle of the night. There was no lion in the story, but he made up so it was all part of the extra biblical narrative that the emerging church needed to hear. But lesser and lesser of that is happening. And I'm not throwing it on the family. I'm just saying I see lesser and lesser of families taking responsibility for the education and nurture. Primary responsibility. Secondary responsibility falls on the place of worship. And let me use a church because that's the vocabulary I've used for the last hour. I think we are losing a generation needlessly because we have chosen not to change a method of communicating truths to our children. So when they come to our classes, our Sunday school, or whatever kind of class that might be, it's like stepping back into the 19th century. Let's be kind to everybody. Stepping back into the 19th century. So Monday through Friday, they're in this environment. And then all of a sudden, they disengage as irrelevant the teachings of the church. So I think parents have to engage intentionally, especially in the formative years. And number 2 is churches have to do a better job of not just teaching, but finding ways to communicate whatever they're trying to teach in a way that will be relevant to that 6-year-old, 5-year-old, whatever that case might be. The prime responsibility really falls on the family and the place of worship.
Thank you. Will you allow me a quick follow-up? The paradigm of 3, right, the parents, the family, and the place of worship, I would suggest that there's actually a 4th, and that's the pervasive secular world that we're all living in.
Sure.
And that our children have access to, notwithstanding that we would like them to not have access to it. And so the question is, in that, as each of those institutions, the 3 that you named, have less influence on our kids, I mean, other than send your kid to a very religious private school, which is what I do, what are the alternatives?
You know, when you bring up the 4th one, I fully agree with that, but so out of our control, so out of our reach, so that the only thing you can do is put parental controls in place. But I totally understand what you're saying. You know, my 15-year-old granddaughter, when she's on her iPad, you know, I like to see, what are you watching?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Final two, okay? This is it.
You said that exposure to internet has raised the bar, and I actually feel that while we have opportunities for raising the bar, for most people it's actually lowered the bar. And I don't think our kids are going on YouTube and watching Martin Luther King. I think they're going on YouTube and watching garbage. And what can leadership do to use these wonderful models not to be intimidated, but rather to use as sources of inspiration and tools for teaching our children?
Yeah, yeah. You know, my comments were in light of the preacher herself or himself. When people come who have been exposed all week or even this morning to somebody who was so eloquent and so proficient and so smooth and so all that. And that has just created a bar raise. But you're so right. We have to find ways to expose our children. I think Chautauqua is a great place to. This is my first time here, but not my last time. It's just a great, great, great place to do exactly what you're talking about. Thank you. And the last question.
We have 4 grandchildren. Well, actually, we have more. 4 of these grandchildren are getting married out of the church. Their mother was, 2 are step-grandchildren. Their mother was brought up Catholic, and they went to church. The boys, their father was brought up Episcopalian, went to church. And then we have a younger set of grandchildren that have soccer and horse riding and everything on Sunday. And what do you do with this situation? We grew up and there wasn't anything happening on Sunday.
I grew up the same way. Yeah. In fact, in our house, you couldn't even watch. We didn't have TVs. I'm talking about you couldn't even go to the park and watch people play. That's a real painful question because we want our children, our grandchildren, to somehow reflect the values that we thought we'd passed on. So first thing I want you to know is no one is to blame. It is what it is. So the church has to find ways. If you have soccer on Sunday, can we provide you a quality service on Saturday? So this Saturday, I'll be in this church in St. Louis. They'll have 2 Saturday evening services, one from 5 to 6 and one from 6:30 to 7:30. And they are as large as Sunday services. And people will come do the 5 to 6 and still have all afternoon or morning to do what they want to do. And that is where I think the church has to be the emerging, nimble, so we don't lose a generation, because we do want them to play soccer and we do want them to do all the horsing around in the best sense of the word. I don't want you to get perturbed about that. But I do think that the church is really doing that in many, many, many places. When I speak at Hillsong in Australia, I spoke there 3 times last year. I was telling Bob today that on any given weekend, with all of the locations, multi-site, they have 55 worship experiences. We live in a time of choices and conveniences. Remember I talked about both and, not either or. It's not yes but, it is yes and. Yes, you can play soccer, and you can still come to church. And it does not have to be in conflict. It is only in conflict because the church somehow does not see that we will needlessly lose a whole generation of our own loving children and grandchildren. But the good news is that we all have a redemptive side to us. And take a long view of life. You have inculcated in them more values than you realize. The Bible tells us, train up a child in which he should go. And when he's old, he'll not depart from it. My mother died in 1982, my dad in 1991. I still hear them. I still hear my dad say. My mom still talks to me. And I'm talking about heebie-jeebie, spooky. I know when I'm about to do something, I can hear my mom say, "Don't play with Larry." Thank you.